Welcome back to the Get a Grip on Life podcast. On today's show, I have a returning guest. Oh, what's that? Oh, what do we got here, Scott? Got some music. Oh, Sylvester Boyd Jr. He's the author of The Road from Money, and he's coming on the Get a Grip on Life podcast. I just finished the first book. There's another one. I haven't read it yet. But, well, let's talk to him first. You're going to enjoy it. But before you do, if you want to start a podcast, you got to go to getagripstudios.com. That's right, getagripstudios.com. Sylvester Boyd Jr., how are you?
Hey, how are you today?
I'm doing well. So, I finished The Road from Money, and I really enjoyed the book, you know. There's so many characters in there, and I want to ask you just to go through a couple things. Layman, is he a real man? That your great uncle or something like that?
Yes, he is. He's my great uncle.
And Leroy and Zach, Mandy.
Leroy is my uncle.
Yeah?
Leroy is my uncle. And Zach was my aunt's first boyfriend, who the main character of the book, Estella.
Yeah. And Mandy, that's your aunt or your great aunt?
Great aunt.
And I'm just going through here because you said that you mixed a little bit of fiction into it because it's a biography of your aunt. But I find some of those characters in the book extremely interesting. Like Zach is a very interesting character in that book. How much of his life and what he was doing did you know from your aunt, and how much did you add as with the license, the license to make the story good?
Well, like in the theater, there was a scene in the theater. I thought that would be a little interesting, and I just took the time and said, "Oh, that would have probably happened in the time." So that might be a little fictional, but the book is about 75-25. It's a lot of truth in it. It's more truth than fiction. Let's put it that way.
The Louis Armstrong at the nightclub. True?
That's true. I was told
it. I was so glad that was true, man. That is one of the best parts of the book. When what's the nightclub owner's name? What's his name in the book?
I can't think of his name right now. It's one of my characters, but it escapes me right now. I got so many characters in mind.
Yeah. What a great, like, the story of the going to the nightclub with the food being cooked and the people partying and the cottages in the back, and Zach is such a fascinating character. Leroy is very interesting. Layman is interesting. You could actually tell their stories too, and they would be really good. To me, this feels like this needs to be a movie. This needs to be maybe one of those series where they add some fiction. They take Zach's life and do a trilogy. You know what I'm saying? Like this story is super interesting, Sylvester.
And I'm glad you enjoyed it. Believe it or not, this book was the original book. The first book, I'm in the third book now, was in 2014, and I haven't had one bad comment. Both books have been award winning.
You know what's interesting about it? So I studied Black American fiction. So when I was and you know what's weird about it? I went on a year, what do they call that when you go from one school to another? Exchange. So I went on an exchange from my university in Ontario to a university in Britain. And when I was there, I was looking at the course syllabus, and they had a course on African American fiction or Black American fiction. And I took the course. And I studied African American fiction in Britain, which is interesting. And so we went through Zora Neale Hurston, Native Son Langston Hughes, Go Tell It on the Mountain. I read a lot of African American fiction, but
Native Son.
Native Son's a great book. Okay, Native Son's an exciting, really good book. Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. to me
right.
was amazing. And then
Amazing.
amazing, like, but it's Black American fiction, and this is what I want to tell you, which is interesting. Langston Hughes, though, as well, like The Negro Speaks of Rivers, his poetry and his jazz lyrics are amazing, but they're uniquely African American in their stories. Like Native Son is an African American story. The Road from Money is an American story. It's not an African American story.
Yeah, I tried to give history. Being a historian, I
Yeah,
came from a historical viewpoint. The characters and the music of the times. I try to get that in there. How people to feel the Great Migration north. At the end of that book, she was going north, if you
sure, yeah,
remember.
of course.
And that takes in encompasses the Great Migration of the African Americans,
But what I'm
or that.
saying to you is that this is a book of American fiction. It's not African American fiction. It's different. The story of Estella is her desire to improve herself, her desire to lift herself up, her desire for education and to work hard and to get ahead. That's the American story, Sylvester, embodying itself in Estella. This is a
I
work of
agree.
American fiction.
I agree. I agree 150% with you. There are further books. I'm going to give you a little hint into book number
Don't spoil
3.
anything. I'm gonna read the next one. I got the next one right here.
I'm not going to spoil the book, but she actually walked on the Great Wall of China. So that's
Yeah,
just one.
yeah, and
So
Estella is an American character. The fact that she's African American, that's important to the story too. You need to understand that. But this is a uniquely American story. This wouldn't happen anywhere else in the world. Like her striving, Julia, her mom, the powerful influence of Julia on her, and
my
Paul.
grandmother,
Yeah,
that's my grandmother. Yeah.
she's a powerful
And
woman, Julia, and she couldn't read. You said in the book that she
she
could.
she was, I always like to say, she was a PhD in common sense
Mm,
and very intelligent person, not with book learning, but just the experience in life
mm,
and having foresight to, she used to say things like, plant a crooked seed, you get a crooked tree which bears crooked fruit. So, I mean, those kinds of things. Or when I put my shirt on when I was a little kid, she would say, boy, you got this shirt on. If I put it on backwards, she said, you got it on hind part before. Little
mm.
things
Yeah,
and you think about hand part before. The hand part is before you got it on backwards. So
yeah,
those types of things. I mean, she loved gardening, from the deep south, cooking. And she loved that, so and she could cook, man, I'll tell you.
I bet. You get the importance, and I want to talk about Paul actually a lot for a sec, and Layman too a little bit, but um, cooking, you can almost taste the food in that book. Like
So I think
food has a huge role in this book.
well, I intended for it to do that. The southern cooking, the stuff. Oh God, I don't know where my phone is here. I didn't. I thought it was off, but it wasn't. Uh, but the southern cooking, soul food,
Oh,
and when you talk about in relation to history, uh, the deep south was not a very pleasant place in the around the turn of the century for African Americans. But there were some good parts of it. I mean, they had picnics and they had field days and they had swimming in the. I mean, they did things that really were fun to do. So it wasn't all drudgery and pain, but it wasn't pleasant either on the other end of it. But I wanted to bring that also out. When Leroy goes swimming in the river,
mm-hmm.
and they see
Sure.
and he's talking about the snakes in the river. He didn't. I heard that many times. He wouldn't go, and everybody else went. Little things like that. I think it, like you said, I wanted to bring my family, but like you said, America to the forefront. The music, you know, with Louis Armstrong,
Sure.
and it wasn't a nightclub. It was a juke joint. That's what they
Sorry,
called it.
juke joint, of course. Yeah, in a barn in the middle of the forest, in the middle of nowhere. You had
You're
to,
right. No,
invi-
and only the
invitation only, invitation only.
only the people in the area even knew where it was.
Sure.
And and I want to talk about the weather. They got caught in a tornado, and so things that people do, and not only black people, but everybody. What
Sure.
everybody can relate to good food. So I
Mm,
tried to make it, like you said, an American story, a story that, yeah, she was African American in the history. I'm a historian, so I wanted to give it a real history
of
flavor,
course.
but I also wanted to give the flavor of the food. And my uncle was a great grandfather was a bootlegger, so he had a steal up in the woods. So he did what
So
people
hang
did.
on. Paul had it. That was a steal. I thought it was a secret garden. He had a steal, and Paul had a steal up in the woods.
He called it his secret garden because he didn't want anybody
Ah,
to know that he had steel in the woods. Of course, he's not going to say I got a little steel up in the woods.
sure.
They used to call the people that did that the revenuers. So he
Okay.
didn't want the revenue. Yeah. So the white lightning and I wanted to capture all of that as it was told to me. So it was like they gave me a gift of a story to write. That's the
That's
way
a
I felt.
culture, though. So I want to talk to you a little bit about. I remember I heard an interview with and I think we might have talked about this on the first show, but I'm not sure. But I heard an interview from the curator of the Negro Leagues Museum or the Negro Leagues Hall of Fame. And I think it's in Louisville, Kentucky, if I remember correctly. And he did an interview and he was talking about how, there was a separate culture. And when I read Langston Hughes and when you read Zora Neale Hurston, there was a Southern black culture that was uniquely African American. The food, the flavors, the music, the the interactions between people, and that was beautiful. And it's in your book. Like I re-encountered it while reading The Road from Money. The chicken, the fried chicken, the flavor. You know,
Yes.
Zach is a badass. I mean,
Mhm.
and the oppression is there, but there's also like um I don't know, like a real like they're alive. Those people come alive in your book. Their stories are real stories, and I wonder how much like separation is better. Like I don't mean to talk. It sounds crazy in 2021 to say this, but how much integration is good and how much separation is good, and whether that our society in 2021 should say, you know what, we actually need a distinct African American culture. It produces Louis Armstrong. It produces beautiful food. It produces things. And we need a distinct African American identity, and we need a different identity for other people. But I don't want to get into like white and black. I think there's an African American identity, period. I don't think there's a white American identity. I think that breaks up into Italian Americans and German Americans and that. But I think in The Road from Money, there's a unique culture that people don't acknowledge exists. And I think that's a mistake. Or white people don't acknowledge. Maybe guys like me don't acknowledge it that exists. But it's a real culture. It has a literature. It has a cuisine. It has music. It has art. It has athletics. Like it's unique unto itself.
Yeah, well, I can say a couple of words. One, jazz. Another
Yeah.
one is blues.
Yeah.
All of that came from the Mississippi Delta. I mean, the I'm part of a legacy. Everybody has American Indians. I studied them Native American. They have a culture.
Sure.
Every group has its own unique culture. Uh, it we sometimes don't recognize cultures of others. That's the big thing. As a country, we're made up of many different cultures.
Hmm.
Asians have a unique culture. When you go to the average Chinese restaurant on the corner, that didn't just come from somewhere. It came from it was part of someone's culture. It didn't fall out of the sky. So cultures, I studied very, very deeply in college. That's maybe why I can put a spin on who we are as a people. That's what I try to do. I try to give you the music. I try to give you the food. I try to give you the dress. I try to give you the
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah.
I try to give you who and what it would feel like to be my aunt and moving through it. If you're a white person or whoever you are, I want you
Sure.
to feel who she
You felt
was
it.
and how she moves through America. And and you say the characters come alive. Man, do they come alive! I had some of the scenes in there would brought tears to my eyes because I felt I was so closely connected to my characters that they were my family, and I could hear my grandmother or my great uncle and my aunts talking to me through the book. So I think I tried to transmit that into the pages of the book. It came from them, my ancestors, into me, into my readers. That's it. My ancestors, into me, then into my readers, and that's the way I want it to be.
I can feel Paul. I can feel Paul. Like not like when I'm in the book, when you're reading the book, you're reading and then you're imagining the character. And I could feel the peace of a man putting his hand on my shoulder or on his son's shoulder or his grandson's shoulder or his granddaughter's shoulder and saying, "Do your best. Yes, learn to read. Go to school." And that strength that's in him coming through the book. He's such a strong character in the book, Paul. It's it's
He was a family patriarch. I mean,
mhm,
he goes back to almost slavery. So he would, and I actually met. That was my great grandfather. I actually met
mm,
him on several occasions. So it wasn't some fictional character that I never saw in life.
yeah.
He was bigger than life because and everybody in the family respected Paul. And you will see him in further books to come. This is a series of 4 books at this point. So, I just got, talked to the person publishing, the book before. I was gonna do 3 books, and the publisher says, "No, we're looking at this as going forward as plays, we're looking at this as going forward as a mini TV series. We're looking at going forward, so we want you to write a 4th book." I wasn't gonna write a 4th book. They said, "Okay." I said, "Okay, well,
I
I'm
think
gonna
I,
write a
I
4th book."
I think Leroy is a very interesting character to pursue. Leroy. I think Zach. I don't. Does Zach appear in the second book? Don't spoil it for me. But Zach is a
I'm not
super.
Hey, I'm not gonna you're not gonna pick it out of me, okay?
So I mean, you have a lot of like the characters, although they're real, they're very vibrant and alive. Um, I want to ask you, sadly, about one part of the book that I really had a hard time reading past, and I'm going to quote the book, right? And then I want you to tell me a little bit about it. Um, that outhouse stinks, Sylvester Boyd Jr.
No, what did
I said
repeat
that outhouse stinks, Sylvester Boyd Jr. That's a
that
quote
was
from your book. That's a quote from your book, from Mandy.
that is true. That is true. It was a family story handed down through the years. I mean, because when things happen, people pass that on.
That's a tough
And I was a
story to read. I had a hard
it
time
was,
picking the
it
book
was
up.
and I would not have left it out for the world because it was a
I don't want
fact.
to say what happens with that because I don't want if
Yeah,
people are listening, they need to encounter that outhouse stinks on their own.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
tough to read,
That's
actually.
true, but it's true. I couldn't have left it out. I wouldn't have left it out. It's true. So, this book's got a lot of truth in it, and some of them are hard truths, but truth's the truth. And this was handed down, passed down through the family. I
And
mean,
then
this is
the story after that, what happens after that when they encounter the sheriff, all of that's true. As you
it's
were
true. As far
I,
as I know, I mean, these stories told me by my ancestors. Okay,
yeah,
so
sure. Sure, but I mean,
yeah,
it may have been a slightly different. It may have been the next day, it may whatever. But
right, right.
like
I always
those facts happen. If you read this book and just to encounter how Mandy's life, what happened, that's pretty powerful actually to read that.
well, that's what I want this book to touch you. I'm not writing words just to, write a book. I'm not writing a book to write a book. I'm writing a book to tell you about who my family was in a way. It's not autobiographical to the very detail. I always say the brick they gave me the bricks and I fill in the mortar. That's the way I looked at it.
Mm.
Uh, the stories were from them, but then if I didn't know somebody went somewhere at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I have to, maybe put that in myself to make it connect, to put the connective tissue into the book.
You see, you know what's funny? When I when I read Native Son, when I read Langston Hughes touched me actually, but um, Zora Neale Hurston touched me. Go Tell It on the Mountain, The Invisible Man. That the Road from Money is unique to those other stories in the sense that it shows you African American culture, like the in the way that, in a way that is it is what it is. Does that make sense? And it's not that, like, this is something to be proud of. This is something that people, that in my mind, if I was an African American, I'm not, I'm a white Canadian dude, but if I was an African American, Estella's story is something to be proud of. That is, she represents something for America and specifically for African Americans that they should hold on to. They should have a statue or like that. Those are your stories. Those are that's real American, not fiction, but real American stories that should be taught to people. And there's not. It's a story of overcoming adversity. It's a story of education, of reaching for more. And I think all Americans could hear that right now. And I think specifically African Americans could say they have a deep, rich culture. And I'm not sure all of them are aware of it. Am I wrong about that, Sylvester?
No, you're not. I think because of our educational system, I think I was a teacher. I don't know if you remember me telling you
Yeah,
that
I mean, I
before when
do.
I,
Sure.
yeah, and we don't educate our children to understand cultures, various cultures, not just one culture. I was raised that you have to understand everybody, not just what you do, because everybody is connected. There's nothing on earth that happens in a vacuum. Everything is connected. You do this over here, and it affects that over there. And that's my book. I could see the connectivity of things. And, you talk to the Pullman porter. In the book.
Yeah,
And we get
he's a character too. Yes, the
yeah,
porter with brings the newspapers.
right, right. So and
Yes.
that's a fact because the train from the south would from Illinois in the north, they would be on the train. The Pullman porters would leave the news of what happened, which inspired the people to say, "Well, they're doing a lot better up there."
Mm,
Then you get into, but that gets into the second book. I don't want to get too much the second book, but that
yeah.
gets in the second. Yeah, so I mean, if you see it, you'll see this book is a continuum. It's all connected. And one book is not disconnected from the other, but each book could stand on its own. That's the way I wanted it to be.
Yes, like when you finish the, I'm not gonna spoiler alert anything, but when you yes, you can read The Road for Money and leave the rest. Now I'm very curious about what happens to Estella, and I'm glad Layman's back in the picture. He like that alligator story with Layman. That's a
True.
ridiculously good story.
It's true. It's true. My mom told me. It's true. My mother told me about that. So yeah, it's true. So some of it was just like a story waiting to be written. And
For sure.
another thing that tells other families, everybody's got a family, and some people
Mm.
know the history of their family. But if you never write it down and nobody ever picks it up to run with it, it just lays and goes to dust. So I'm proud, and and believe me, my family members have, oh, they just love it. And, it's like a story of the family. And so it's like genealogy in a book. So they look at it from that standpoint.
This needs, like, Netflix or somebody should pick this up and make it into a, like, one of those 10-part series. Because they're so good at doing making the scenery look like it looked in the 1930s, late 1920s and 1930s. Like, they could really make this story fly. And like I have a vision in my head of what Julia and Paul's farm looks like with the chicken coop story with Leroy and the leg. Like, I have a vision in my head of what that looks like. I don't want it ruined by a movie, but I probably would watch it anyway just to see what someone else thought of it. And then the tornado story in the house when Zach and Estella stay in the house. I don't want to spoil any of the story for anybody, but I have a vision in my head from that. But I really think this story could be broken up into 5 or 10 episodes in a season of a really good those television series that they do now, like a really good one.
Well, I have it, and my publisher that's doing the one I just told you wanted me to write another book.
Yeah.
They wanted to get into the HBCUs
Mm,
as part of a course.
mhm.
They're looking at putting it on the newsstand. My daughter is on the cover of the last book that I wrote, so it really connected. Which who is that's her great aunt. It's in the book. It's the
Sure.
story of her great aunt. So I want people to see my family has a story to tell. Pick up a pen and put it down on paper.
Sure.
And but we let a billion stories a day go by us. We don't pick them up. We don't follow them. Not everybody's a writer, but guess what? I wasn't a writer either. My background was in geography and history, but history comes a part of this, and also geography. But you
It's a
know,
period.
take
This is a period piece. This is a
yeah,
period piece, right?
several periods.
Yeah,
That's going to
I only read the first one, but yes.
U.S. history. You when you get through reading the
Totally.
last book, you'll have some things that the wars. You'll have who was on the radio, what was going on with the
Sure.
radio, what was the news at that time. I covered the news quite extensively through radio, through TV. You watch TV come of age. You watch, I'm
Sure.
trying to give the story.
And it's from an African American perspective, which is why I think it's so useful for the historically black colleges to be studying this. And I'm sure they do. Like, I have never been to one. I'm sure they study a host of artistic expressions by African Americans. But this needs to be on the agenda, and I'm an outsider, but the way you've combined all the different elements of the culture into a story is very delicious, actually, for the reader. Like, that's the only way to describe it.
Well, I'm glad you liked it so much. But like I said, I've had a lot of comments, and they've all been positive. I'm always waiting. I was okay. There's got to be somebody that don't like it, but I just haven't been exposed to that. I'm sure there's somebody that don't like it somewhere, but
No, I'm sure
everybody.
there. I disagree with you. It's impossible. It's an impossible story not to like. It's not possible. It has everything. There's
But
nothing.
I want transportation, the train.
Yeah.
What the train looked like, and how did people react to? And it gets in the race a little bit. You had to ride in the last car on the train, and then she could never understand
Mm-hmm.
when the train went across the Mississippi River.
Mm-hmm.
Things changed all of a sudden. On one side of the river is one culture and way of acting toward people, and on the other it's another. And so all those little details, I like the nuances of things.
But
You got
but you know what though? You know what's interesting? I think that, and you may say, I might get in big trouble when I say this here, but I think at that time, not now, but between, in the, what's that time in America called, Restoration, or what? I can't remember what they called it after,
reconstruction,
Reconstruction. Yeah, to the New Deal, and then to the end of the Jim Crow law. But I think that there needed to be a certain amount of separation, like like Paul and his parents needed to be free on their own, you know? And then your book is about the education, the learning to read comes in. And then they start to read, and then it's like, well, we can read too, and we should also have access to these other things. But in the South, where slavery was actually a real thing, I think it would take some time and some generations for people to be able to come back together. And I think the separation allowed for, like, that Southern culture you're talking about is premised in a way, the music, the food, the vibrance is in some ways a result of the separation. Is that crazy to like? I know what I'm saying is super controversial, but it's almost like in response to that, here's this beautiful
No,
culture that emerges. No?
no, I think, I've learned to be a listener as well as that somebody can talk for days. But
Sure.
uh, you listen to a person, and I can feel what you're saying. The culture took time to develop. You got to remember, slavery cut uh, African American people or Africans away from their homeland. So the language had to be redeveloped. They had music that they brought with them, rhythms, drums were discovered by Africans. The drums, going back to, when you get deep into history, that can bring history to the book and understand what my characters do, why they do it. That's the big thing. Why would Paul have to do what he did? It was breaking the law, but he had to do that to survive. So if you understand why somebody does something, your reader can then maybe understand that same thing. But the language had to be developed. We talk a little different. Africa is many times bigger than the United States, and there's many cultures within the African diaspora. So you got 53, I think it's 53 countries. Last my geography, right? About 53 countries on the continent of Africa, and they have cultures within their culture. So when you put those people together on a ship and bring them from somewhere, it's like taking people from all over the United States. A New Englander may not be the same as a person in Texas, or a person from the blue mountains of the green mountains of Vermont may not be the same a person that comes out of South Florida. So I mean, that's what happens. You mix people, and so the black race was never from Africa. All Africans don't think they're not one big homogeneous body.
And neither are
They're
white
many.
people. Like there's no
That's
like
right.
when
That's
people say white people, like there's no like that's not a thing. Like there's no that's only a thing by opposite looking or by contrast. Like white people is very diverse and there's no interest group of white people. They're just like they're very sub grouped into different areas or Italians and whites and this sort of stuff. But I mean, there is though, to my mind, a like African Americans, the descendants of African slaves, is a coherent group of people that white people is not. Does that make sense? What I'm saying
It
there?
makes it does make sense to me because we have developed from slavery on,
Hmm.
because it's like a new birth on a new land. You left your land. You were taken from your land, brought to another land. So
That's
imagine
the
if,
Buffalo Soldier that Bob
yeah,
Marley's singing about, or the
you're right.
that kind of thing. So what I'm wondering, like, so when people say white people, so I think when you say black people in America, it depends on what you mean. To me, it's like, are you saying like African Americans, the people who were descended from slaves brought from Africa? Because
Right,
that's a
right,
unique culture unto itself. That
correct,
it has its own
correct.
cuisine. It has its own language, its own way of speaking. It has its own music, its own literature, it has its own colleges, the historically black colleges. It has its own education system. Um, and then you say white people, well that doesn't mean the same thing at all as saying African American culture in the United States. That's a
Yeah,
coherent thing.
yeah, but you got to say it. You just uh, alluded to the point that I want to make is that white people, and you can be Italian, you can be Polish, you have in each one of those, if I'm having a pierogi, that's Polish. Okay,
Sure.
so you got to understand that
Yeah,
everybody has their
sure.
own culture. I mean, I guess I'm deep into this because this was my degrees: history,
Sure.
geography, the world, tasting and feeling the world. That's the way I feel about history and geography. And I've been able to be fortunate enough to go to Denmark, where
Mm.
they're Danish people, Scandinavia. I've been into Norway. So being able to, and most people may not be able to be fortunate enough to be blessed as I have to travel the world, to able to go to the Caribbean, and then you see influences. For example, if I go to some of the Caribbean islands, like Haiti, or there's
Mm,
European influences. There's cultures on top of other cultures, and cultures blend like people blend.
mm,
The concept of race is a mental concept. That's all it is. I see you one way or another. It's how I perceive you. It doesn't mean anything real. In reality, your skin is lighter than mine, but you're a human being, and
sure.
that's the way you gotta. You were part of the same family, but man has taken shades and various hues of skin and made that into something good or bad, or perceptions, and that to me is our biggest mistake, that we could get past, because everything has a color. There's nothing that doesn't have a color. Every species on earth has. It may be a leopard with spots all over it, but everything has a color. There's nothing that's clear. I haven't seen too many clear animals or clear people or clear anything. And in the wisdom of this, whoever put us on earth, and however you believe your religion, that entity made everybody have a color. Now, how you perceive that color, how you accept your color, and what you think of color is your own concept. It's a human concept. Racism is a construct of the human mind. That's the way I see it. And once you don't look at, I see you as a human being. First
Yeah.
of all, you're a human family. And then this thing of race is, if you take it to its own extremes, when you think about it, uh, we're related to white people, or however you want to put it.
Hmm.
Some of our biggest characters in history in America, Thomas Jefferson had slaves, and he then had kids by slaves,
Hmm.
and those kids are, related to white people who may sit next to them on a bus or something and not know each other.
Look,
So I mean,
Jefferson is a very popular African American last name, actually.
right, right, and there's a reason for that. So but we we've taken something that is very natural and made it very traumatizing, and we've done a lot of negative things with something that shouldn't have been negative at all. We're part of the human race. We're all part of the same family, and this pandemic that's going through us right now, it's not saying, well, I can't go to Africa. It's not saying I can't go to Scandinavia. It's touching everybody. You're human. The virus doesn't care where you come from, how much money you got, where you've been, and where you're going. It's a virus, and it does what viruses do. We're all part of the human family, the same way, but we don't look at it that way. We try to separate. And I wanted to do a book on separation, but I'm I'm kind of delayed with this series now. But I want to do it. The very thing I want to talk about how we separate along certain lines, and they're always the same: race, religion, wealth, gender. I can name them. They all this, they stay the same through mankind's history, and I want to show that scream of how we separate all the way down. So that's just the way I'm looking at it. But I wanted to educate people as much as I can.
But here's what I would
And
say. I would say, and I want to touch on that separation for a second, because I don't think the results, and while I think I hear Estella's frustration, a journey to find why, right? I hear it. It's in the book, right? But it's an American story at the same time. It's not like, to me, this isn't a story, an American story, period, in the story. But there's also the element of separation between black and white, between man and woman in the book, has a power to it. It has a growth force. There's something to blacks living on their own and men and women doing things differently that expresses itself in the book in a way that doesn't always come across as wrong. Right? Does that make? Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, I'm going into weird territories here. I'm being a little bit brave, but like, I almost feel like, why not acknowledge the uniqueness of the Southern African American culture? Like, that's what I think is being acknowledged in the book. That this is unique. It's wonderful. It has its own music. It has its own food. It grew under horrible circumstances and oppression. And this is the beauty of it. and all
I
of
agree.
its form, you
I
know?
agree. I agree. I agree 100% with you. Uh, but then you think about America or the world for that matter. What would the world have been without Motown records? I mean, that came out of that experience. I mean,
Well,
jazz.
but what I'm saying is that African Americans should look back with this on with so much pride.
I do. I do. I don't know what every African American. I do. I always tell people if I died tomorrow, and then somebody said you can wake up and come back, and you can choose a color. I'm who I am right now.
Yeah.
I am who I am right now. I am so proud of who I am because I know I stand on the shoulders of giants. I'm not. I don't. Then I think if I could transmit that to young African American kids, that there's no such thing as a superior human being. There's
Yeah.
only human beings who have more money. There may be human beings that are older or younger. I mean, we all the same. We do, and I always say this all the time. We're all born, we all live, we all die.
Yeah, for
And I
sure.
haven't seen a human being that don't do those things. Now, if you can show them to me, please. I haven't never seen it. Or
Yeah,
I have
for
never
sure.
seen I've never seen a clear human being. Somebody that doesn't have color. Skin has color. Simple
Yeah.
as that.
And but he,
Matters.
and I think what I see in the book is less of like there's some tragedy with Mandy. That's tough to read. Okay? Like I read it, and then what happens with Paul and Leroy in the sheriff's office, that's tough to read. Okay? Like that's heart-wrenching for anybody that's a human being to read that. To see what they go through with that. I'm not going to say what it is because hopefully some people listening to this will buy the book and read it. But that's pretty heart wrenching. That rips your heart out when you read that. It almost makes me want to cry right now, actually, that whole part of that book. But in a sense, there's like, I think there's, I think people are missing something in 2021. They're missing when they're angry about racism or they're angry about these things. Like, I agree. There racism? Yes, there was racism with your Aunt Estella, and horrible things happened actually, like tragedies. But there, there's nothing to be ashamed of with for African Americans. Like, if you read these books and these stories, these people overcome incredible odds actually and succeed. And I feel like there needs to be more positivity around the African American culture. Not that we don't need to discuss race relations or race issues, but I think we need to increase the positive reception to African American culture, the Negro Leagues, the food, the cuisine, the stories, the literature, the poetry, the music, the jazz, like these things need to be lifted up and said, "Hey, this is a culture actually. There's something to grab onto here and to hang on to and to be proud of and to look at." And I feel like that's not being, to me in 2021, that's not what's being talked about enough, Sylvester. And I wish it
Well,
was.
I think that's education. I alluded to education before. You had experiences with African American literature, and you've gone into African American culture somewhat, but not everybody does that. I'm very versed on all sorts of cultures, but not everybody does that. I've been able to travel the world, and I'm pretty sure you've traveled some. Not everybody can do that, and
Mm.
so the people who most need it are the people who don't get it. And then
Yes.
that's the way I look at it.
Yes. It's almost like that's exact. I agree with you. Like it's almost like people feel robbed of their history or something, and that they want to get angry. But and I understand the frustration in some points, but I feel like that energy, a lot of the negativity, could be flipped into celebrating what it is to be an African American. I would celebrate it. I would love to go to the picnic in the book, brother. I would love to be there. And seriously, and celebrating like I'm not, obviously I can't go back in time, but like there's another way to look at the world, and I feel like your book is show. That's why I said in the beginning, this is an American story. This is not This is not African American fiction. There is that. That's a real thing. That's a real thing. But there's some things um, that cross categories, that go beyond labels and that. And I think this story does. And I thank you for for meeting me and sending me your book, and then having a chance to talk about it after, Sylvester.
Well, I appreciate you reading it, and I'm glad you thoroughly enjoyed it. I enjoyed writing it, and it's been a work of my heart. So I think that comes across. I was sincere in what I put in the book, and it was as true as I could make it. And it's almost not a work of fiction, but of course I had to put some things in that weren't quite accurate. But it's what I think we need to know about who we are. I think the recent situation here in America with the thing on the Capitol that just happened here on the 6th, that's a reflection of people not knowing exactly who they are and following a
Mm-hmm.
leader that will lead you anywhere, and you don't have the knowledge or the facts at hand, or you deny facts. There's two ways to look at facts. Either you deny them, or you try to turn them around to be something other than what they are. So that's part of our problem right now. It's not just a black white problem. It's a problem that we've had through history. World War II, we had some of the same things where Europeans turned against Europeans. And then we had the Civil War where Americans turned against Americans. And so images have a lot to do with it. How you feel about who you are is a big part of what you will become. And who you are will really come out as who you are. What you think about yourself. How do you think about? I perceive myself as God's creation, and my grandmother would say, "God made you, and He ain't make no junk boy." And that's what she used to say, and that
That's
stayed with me.
Julia. That's Julia.
Julia, that's her. You
Yeah.
see, you can
She's such
hear
a powerful force in the book.
she. Well, I love my grandmother to death, to this day. I mean, and that the person, a lot of her wisdom. I used to sit at her knee when I was 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, and she would tell me these stories, and I
Mm,
would sit there and I'd be spellbound, never
sure.
thinking I'd write a book about it.
Of
But
course.
she put that knowledge into my head. What was it like when she was a little girl? And she used to tell me, I go back to before slavery. My dad goes back to almost slavery time, and his mom was a slave, and she would tell me how things were back then. And I can go. I never been to Money, Mississippi. Never been. So I think when you read the book, you think I'd been there
Mm.
because of her, what she told me, and not only her, but all my relatives were from the deep south, and they had an unabiding faith that they could do better than what the society told them they could do. They
And
were who
that's
they
what's
were.
lost now. That's what's lost. The
Yeah,
faith is gone. There's a and that's a white and black thing. It's not a black thing or a white thing. I think a lot of people have lost their faith in America. And
yeah,
what happened? I remember I did a podcast, Scott. When was it? After the election, a couple days after, I saw some news about barricades being put up, and I did a podcast just on my own about my thoughts about people getting violent about elections. And this is not America. This is not Canada. And then I saw on the 6th, YouTube suggested my own YouTube video to me, if you can imagine. YouTube suggested my own YouTube video to me. And then I watched it and I thought, and then I saw what was happening at the Capitol. And I thought, this is what happens when people buy in 100, and I'm not going to criticize 74 million Americans who voted for Trump, because I don't think that's not the right thing to do. But Donald Trump is an egotistical narcissist. That's
oh,
100% true. Nobody
correct,
can deny
correct,
that,
correct.
right? Whether you're Fox News or CNN or whoever, Breitbart or whatever, you're Antifa, Donald Trump is an egotistical narcissist, and they never want to lose. They'll never admit they're wrong. They'll do anything, right? And so you saw that expressed out in the American people. That's really sad, actually, that people behave that way. It's a
Well,
tragedy.
yeah, well, I feel as a citizen, for democracy to work, you have to be knowledge. You have to have the knowledge of how your government works before you vote for somebody to make it work.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think enough people really get into the weeds of citizens make up a democracy. Democracy will not live without the citizens' input, and you got to understand that there's a lot of reasons for what happened. The top people, the rich people, they know they could never outvote the people at the bottom. They don't have the sheer numbers. So there's a reason that they like to split people up. There's
Mm-hmm.
reasons why they like to suppress the vote because they can't outvote you. And I think some of that is the real fear at this point. It's not all black and white. It also comes down to elitism, and it comes down to rich and poor. It comes down to many. It comes down in many, many ways. And we may zero in on black and white, but it's also a financial thing here. The people at the top who have the money, they want to keep the money and they want to make more money. And if you vote them out of office or out of power, they can control things. You control things when you're at the top. You don't control things from the bottom. But now what's happening? There's a sense that the bottom is kind of getting kind of quaky at the bottom down there, and so now I think that there's a big fear, and the big word is fear. The big word, the key word to what America is going through is fear of change. Change is always difficult. It always means leaving what's familiar and going to something that's very unfamiliar. And the country is going through that right now. So I don't want to get into that, but that's a political book that I want to write. But it's a reason for why we're going. Labor unions used to be very powerful. Then there was an era that the people at the top said, "Wait a minute, if we let them tell us what to do, how much to make an hour, we won't have that power and control over there." So there was an effort starting with I think Ronald Reagan with PAPCO with the traffic controllers here in the United States to break up unions, and it's been union busting ever since. So now that things are starting to go the other way, people are starting to combine. They're starting to feel their wings. Something that happened that amazed me during this electoral period in the United States, the deep red South, which is very Republican oriented, very I don't want to say it's not it's more blacks in most of the states in the South than there are anywhere else per. And so Georgia went to the Democrats. Something I just knew wasn't going to happen, even being a student of politics, but it happened. And that shakes people up. And when people get shook up, you get the riot in the Capitol because fear is running amok. And until we change the fear that people have, until we can say, okay, we're one nation, and we always say we're one nation, indivisible, we're living just as all. I hated to say the indivisible because we're very divisible. How can you say that? So we have to get rid of a lot of our hypocrisies. We have to learn who we are as a people. Once you let the
Sometimes
the
when you're saying that, that's what you're striving for. That's not what is.
no, I agree.
You
I agree.
understand? Like
I agree.
when you say
I agree.
indivisible, like you're saying, I'm making a pledge to try and manifest and embody that reality into the world. That's the pledge. The pledge is not, that's what exists. Everybody knows that doesn't exist. But I think what America is trying to do, and I think, it's interesting because you'll hear on the right, and I hate the words right and left. I really hate that. I don't like right and left. But if let's say people that that say they would rather what happened on the 6th of January didn't happen. Okay, let's say those people, right? And they say they want to make justifications. So they say, but look at all the rioting that happened all summer long and whatever, right? That's it. And nobody said anything bad about that. But it doesn't change the fact, right? Like whatever position you're in, okay, in whether you're a right wing or a left wing, or you're white or you're black or whatever your problem is, if you are, as an American, are not ashamed about what happened on the 6th of January, then you need to rethink your position, because that's not what should happen. Now, going from that, that doesn't mean that you say, yeah, but the left-wing people riot too. No. That doesn't fly, bro. That doesn't fly. You have to have a higher level. You have to rise above that if you wish to be if you wish to make change. We need people that are seeking to do it in a way that, I don't know how to put it the right way. Unity will not come from smashing up things. Unity will not come from destroying Capitol buildings or raiding things. Or where it will come from is uplifting people and giving them opportunities. And I think a lot of people, Estella may have been, in retrospect, what people think is very hard circumstances, but she legitimately felt like she could beat it. And I think a lot of people now don't feel that way, Sylvester. They don't feel like Estella felt. Does that make sense? And how do we
It,
restore that?
it does. We won't get to a place of peace, in my opinion. This is just personal opinion. We won't get to a place of peace until you recognize my grievances and I figure out what your grievances are. I need to know why you did what you did, and you need to know why I feel the way I feel. I think the apology is America. In America, America has never apologized for slavery. It's a simple thing to do. They have been unwilling for whatever. We've had all kind of Congresses. When you put
What
people
about
through that kind of,
Obama didn't do it?
no, he didn't do it.
Why
It
not?
doesn't make any difference. Who's in? I don't know. It hasn't been done. That's what I
Like,
go by, and I
Obama
think
didn't stand up and say the slavery was wrong, and
no. It has to go
America.
through. It has to go through Congress. That type of declaration. I don't think we say, "Well, I'm a black president," and I say, "Okay, it's." No, it can't go that way. It has to go through and be sincere. It has to be sincere. People have to apologize when you do a wrong thing. You have to sometimes say, yes, you were wrong and you're sorry. Slavery was wrong. I'm sorry. Jim Crow was wrong. I'm sorry. I think then you're acknowledging, like in South Africa, where they had the truth and recreation
Yeah,
thing. We
right.
got to have that kind of thing here in America. You can't expect me to apologize to the slave master, till the slave master says, I'm sorry for what I did to you. That's a one-way street. Oh, okay, and don't tell me to
Yeah, but the
forget it.
slave master doesn't exist anymore. He's gone. In South Africa, he was a
No, he
real
doesn't.
person. No,
He
in South
doesn't. But
Africa, he was a real person, like a living human
okay, but
being. There was a
okay,
difference.
today, okay,
There was in the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions that happened, I don't know, from 95 or whenever they happened in South Africa. You were talking about the black person who blew up the building and killed the white people in the building, and the white person who blew up the black church and shot people and was discriminating. Those people were the people who did the acts.
okay. But now you got to look at today. To
So,
look at today.
but the people, like, when you say that, people need to apologize for the Jim Crow law, like, there's nobody alive that enforced the Jim Crow law as it stood in when it was taken down in 1965. Those people are gone. That's whatever, 60 years ago or 70 years ago, and then they don't exist anymore. They're not.
Okay,
You're
but
talking about other people's ancestors. I think the answer is the opposite, Sylvester. I think it's the other way around.
okay, but I want to give you a parallel today. We're talking now. We're not talking about ancestors. We're talking about parallel today. Had the people who went into the Capitol and destroyed the capital of the United States and was on the insurrectionists, is what they were, treasonous, and tried to do a coup. Those words need to come up. Coup, treason, insurrection. Those are the words that destroy countries. And They were treated with kid gloves. It was like having a big party, and then they just walked out and went home. Now the FBI is trying to round them up. Why not do the same thing you would do if those people had been of color?
There
You
were
wouldn't have
people of
treated
color
them.
there. There were
There was
lots of people of color there.
there
That
were very
that
few.
wasn't all. No, that's not true.
I was
That's
looking
not
at it
true.
on TV. No, I
That's
was
not
looking at it,
true.
and
So the leader of the
it was
plow, the leader of
95.
the leader of the Proud Boys, I think he's a black Latino.
That's okay. That don't make
Like,
any
I mean,
difference.
it does. I
And
don't think. Listen, the people that were the people that were the idea that the people captured with Donald Trump are white supremacists, I think, is wrong. There were a lot of
well,
African Americans that supported Donald Trump. Lots,
I didn't say there
lots.
wasn't. I didn't
Right?
say. I'm
So
not
how do
saying.
you like
I'm
so this idea that it's
telling
related
you.
to white supremacy is not true at all. It's related
Well,
to somebody who is an egotistical narcissist. Yes, I agree with
I agree,
that.
but I look at the treatment. This is what black people see. I'm telling you I'm a black person,
No,
and I hear a lot of
no,
black people.
some black people, other black people agree
Okay,
with
that
what happened.
what I know. Okay, I'm just going to go from personal experience. We're treated differently, and that is a classic example. When Black Lives Matter laid in the street, they were treated with tear gas. The whole
5
thing got
people were
military.
killed at the Capitol building. A woman was shot. Um, I don't
They
buy
were
that.
committing suicide
I
and killing.
disagree with you there. I disagree with you. I can tell you why. I disagree with you because I don't think the idea that this is white versus black or whatever is wrong. That's just not true. There was lots of African Americans there, for sure. And
I'm
if it
saying
doesn't take you long to look up and find that a lot of African Americans support Donald Trump. Lots.
I did.
Like we're not
I
talking
agree.
about
I agree.
5%. We're talking about probably 25 to 30% of African
I agree.
Americans.
I agree. But here's my
So
point
what
that
do
I
you
want to make.
call those people? Are they race
No,
traitors?
what
Are they Uncle
no,
Toms? Like what
I'm
are
saying
they?
treatment. I'm saying a treatment. I'm saying the treatment. No matter whether they black, brown, purple, doing what they were doing was wrong. It was destroying, and like I said, those words again: treason, insurrection. Trying to overthrow a government that was wrong. Had they been black, I'm not saying I don't care whether they're black, brown. The people that were in there, let's put it that way, they would have been treated differently had the group been minority white. And now we'll disagree on that point. This is where
That
we
I
I,
can't
I,
say. That's a different story because it was such a unique. You might be right about that. That I
you can
won't
put
say.
yeah, they had a split screen on TV showing Black Lives Matter how they were treated and how these people were treated. If they had been black, I think it'd have been a lot more death there. I think number one, I think that the just we have two systems. To we have to acknowledge what's real. If you don't acknowledge what's real, you'll never get to the point where you can do things that's real. You have to acknowledge that there's two systems. That there's a justice system for people who have lighter skins in America. Let's put it that way. And there's a different system for everybody else, not just black people, but Mexicans, Indians, Spanish, whatever. The whole
There's a lot
group
of
is.
black people that disagree with that. And I'm not going to, I don't know that. I can't say either yay or nay to you. I'm not going to say that's not true. I won't go that far because um, I respect you too much, quite frankly. Um,
I'll give you a book that tells you that.
no, but hang on,
Read
hang on.
the.
Let me finish my point. There's a lot of African Americans that I know. I don't know them personally, but I read what they write and they report otherwise. But let's do this. Let's do this. You and I, we always have great discussions. I love the first
Yeah,
one,
great.
and I thank you. I thank you. What's so refreshing about you is your patience and your what's the right word? Um, you're not you're very relaxed in your way you go about it. So I want to read The Journey Continues. Give me a couple months. I want to get a good weekend and bite right deep into it. And I would love, love, love to talk to you again, Sylvester Boyd.
Not a problem. We almost getting to be friends now. So yeah,
Well, you know
I'll
what? Where you live in Chicago, right?
correct.
So when all this
Right.
stuff opens up, I want to come down to Chicago. It might be another year, who knows? I got to come down to Chicago, and we have to go, and I have to go to your favorite soul food restaurant or somewhere, uh, so we to eat some African American cuisine. I got to do it with you. I would be such an honor for me, to be honest with you.
Okay, that you're on, and I'll even pick up the tab. How about that?
Oh, come on! I want to get that. No, I
Yeah,
want
we
to.
can do it.
All right, we'll flip for it. We're gonna flip for the
All right.
tab.
Well,
How's that?
okay, you're on. You're on. You're
All
on.
right,
Um,
Sylvester.
but yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed the book, and you got a couple of more coming. So read that one quick because I'm turning them out. So uh, no, the
Well,
story keeps going on.
yeah, I'm gonna read it, and we'll talk maybe a month or two, maybe sometime in March, Sylvester. Oh,
You got
nothing
my
but love
email.
for you. Yeah,
You
nothing
got
but
you
love for
got
you,
my
brother.
email. You
All
got my
right.
email. Thanks a lot, and I appreciate being on your show. Thanks for having me.
No, the pleasure's all mine. Thank you.